Welcome to The Pilot Life, the show where we sit down with people who are passionate about aviation. My name is Brendan. I've been a commercial airline pilot for over 20 years, and in that time, I've heard some incredible stories. This is the show that I share those with you. Welcome on board. Yes, fellow pilots, welcome back. Another pilot's living room. You know what it means. Another show, another podcast. Here with my good friend, Captain Perry Solmonson. Perry, how are you, sir?
Excellent.
Excellent.
Good to see you, Brendan.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time to share your story with us. I think we first met, I was a new hire at Horizon, and I think you were a tech pilot at the time. And I think the tech pilots are the smart pilots, aren't they?
We're the lucky ones. We get to do some really cool stuff.
Yeah. And so you came in and briefed, and there was an air about you of this guy knows what he's talking about. He has this kind of this quiet, calm confidence to you. And I think every other pilot around, like, this is someone that you respect, and not because you feel like you have to, but because you want to. And everyone that I talked to when I told them I'm going to be sitting down with Perry are just like, oh, tell Perry hi. He's the greatest guy. I mean, and so I think this is an amazing opportunity to sit down with you and find out a little bit more about you. Where was that first spark of aviation for you?
I remember talking with my mom many years ago about this, and just airplanes, rockets. It's just always been my thing. And she said, when you were first learning to talk, your first 4 words were mama, daddy, hot, airplane. And I don't know where you got it from, but when you were fussy, we'd go out to the local airport and sit out in front of the runway, and you just watch airplanes. And gosh, I wasn't even a year old yet. I was 11 months old when John Glenn did Friendship 7, the Mercury orbital manned mission flight. And I don't remember anything about it, but there was a black and white TV, and watching John Glenn coming back into the Earth's atmosphere. Walter Cronkite was doing the narration, and I didn't remember that at the time, but looking back now at those events, and I just thought, that's it. That's what I want to do.
Yeah. And so is that where your first experiences with flying started?
Yeah. So I knew that if I'm going to be in the space program, I needed a technical degree. So I was kind of working towards that. It'd be nice to get my pilot's license sooner rather than later. And my physics teacher, Mr. Bill Harris, was also a CFI. And so he was my primary flight instructor. And that was just a wonderful experience. And I remember him teaching me before I soloed. He says, now, Perry, there's 3 rules of flying you have to remember. Don't stall, don't stall, don't stall. Yes, sir. And I'm a little embarrassed to say this, but that was back in, I was 16 when I started, soloed when I was 17, got my license, 17, but it was $15 an hour wet to rent a Cessna 150, and Mr. Harris was $8 an hour.
Wow, so $23 an hour.
So I figured it was about $1,000 to get my private. My folks bankrolled me, but I put it into lawn mowing units, so I mowed for $5. I'd mow all the neighbors' lawns. So I figured it cost me 200 lawns get my private.
Incredible.
By the time I was a sophomore, 19, I had my CFI. So I was teaching flying at the local 141 Cessna Pilot Center in Fort Collins, and taking all the mechanical engineering classes. And by the time I graduated, I had about 1,600 hours of flying time, had my single engine ATP. My eyesight was 20/30, 20/40, and didn't know how that was going to play out, but you got to go for it.
Yeah.
You never know till you try. So the Navy recruiter was on campus for the graduating senior mechanical engineers, and what do you want to do? Well, what else is there besides flying off boats? And well, you have to go to Denver, take the officer candidate school test, and we'll see how you do. And so a couple of weeks later, whatever, came back and met again, and he says, well, you passed, you're in, but you've got not 20/20 vision. This was in 84, and they weren't starving for pilots at the time. So he said, you could do a tour in the back seat, kind of be Goose of Maverick and Goose kind of thing. If you do everything perfectly and there's an opening for you, you'll get a pilot slot, but that's not a guarantee. But we come to CSU because it's a required curriculum item in your mechanical engineering background to take nuclear engineering. So we'd like you to be a nuclear engineer on the subs. And I thought, yeah, wrong end of mean sea level. Thanks for being honest, but I'm going to do something else.
Never heard it put as the wrong end of the mean sea level.
Yeah.
That's pretty good.
Yeah.
I got that same story from the Navy when I went in, but I mean, my vision was like 2080, right? And they said, yeah, you can do backseat, and I'm like, I don't want to be Goose. I want to be Maverick, right?
Yeah.
The Navy door closes for you, or you choose to walk away from that opportunity. Where then do you start to focus?
Another company consulting engineer was also interviewing on campus, and I ended up getting a job with them in Denver. My folks living in our home in Golden, so I lived with my folks for 2 months, and it just, the guy that hired me, that was my boss, was just a very difficult personality, and I just realized, this just isn't right. And the guy that had hired me originally as a flight instructor in Fort Collins, very dear friend, and more on him later, he moved to Van Nuys, California, to be chief pilot of a very large up-and-coming 135 outfit. Cessna 421, Chieftains, Senecas, Piper Mojave, pressurized Navajo.
Yeah.
And I went in and spoke with my boss and says, hey, would you mind if I left early at 5 o'clock on Friday? And he kept warming, is kind of his personality. You can see why it wasn't a good fit. But I finally got up, closed his office door, and says, I'm going out to look at this flying job. And he didn't even blink. He had a very strong East Coast accent, very type A, always buzzing around. And he looked right at me and says, if you go, I want your letter of resignation on my desk before you leave today.
Wow.
What can I say? I don't even know if this is the right fit for me. Nope, that's the way it's going to be if you're going to leave here at 5. So I did, and I moved to California.
What an amazing lesson, though, right? Because you're leaving what is guaranteed, but sometimes the only way to get forward is just to take that jump, right?
23 years old, and
So you're 23, and you pack up your bags, you tell mom and dad bye, and you head out west.
Yeah, so kind of an interesting thing. Flying charter in Fort Collins, we had a pressurized Baron, a 135 outfit there, and I'd become the chief flight instructor and chief pilot of that for a while before I graduated, moved on. But we're now flying bigger airplanes, the 421. I just love that airplane. That is a magnificent airplane. Be very gentle as you pull the props back so you don't mess up the geared propeller drive system. The company ended up being approached by an air ambulance broker. That's an important term. A broker doesn't own aircraft, they basically contract out with medical personnel, nurses primarily, and they might have a little toolbox with some medical supplies in there, really basic stuff, but they have the contacts at all these hospitals when patients are being discharged, but they're non-ambulatory. They can't travel independently on their own, and they're a long ways from home. They'll get on an air ambulance flight to take them home. And these companies had done a really good job of getting all on the top of the Rolodex cards, if you will, with all these hospitals, these social workers. So it turns out that I'm going to be flying an air ambulance flight. And so Hank, my buddy, and I go out and I get checked out, 135 check in the airplane. We taxi back in, and there's this air ambulance broker guy. I'd never met him before. And there's this lady standing next to him. And turns out, this is going to be your nurse tomorrow. This is Monica. That was October of 84, I think. And we ended up doing a lot of air ambulance flying, which would basically be, we would go from California to Kansas, and then we'd fly a short distance to Iowa, and then we'd take someone to Florida, and then someone from Florida to Toronto, and you just hopscotch around for a couple of weeks at a time. You just literally didn't know. But what I've discovered, probably 50% of the time, family members up front in the right seat, we're cruising along at 25,000 feet, got the headset on, and they would say, I've always wanted to fly in a Learjet. And I would always pull my headset back, like, did I hear you correctly? And I didn't know what game was being played, and I knew enough to not start, correcting them. So what these air ambulance brokers were doing was selling the trip as a Lear trip, but paying less with propeller piston aircraft.
Wow.
I realized, well, if you can't beat them, or can't join them, in this case, beat them. So Monica and I started an air ambulance business, International Air Care.
Are you still thinking maybe I can follow this down to some kind of NASA space position, or by this time, are you thinking maybe airlines, or where's your headspace here?
Yeah, good question. And at the time, I was so preoccupied with this business. It was 24/7. Living in Southern California, I'm kind of in the heartland for a lot of the technologies going on there, and thinking, is one thing going to lead to another? After a little over 3 years of doing that, I realized, I think what I'd rather do is I'm going to go do the pilot's life, right? I'm going to go be an airline pilot.
Yeah.
Alaska Airlines would be the place, just because I liked where they flew. I took a 6-week sabbatical. I left my business partner, Monica, in charge. I started driving from El Segundo, and turned into a father-son thing. So my dad flew out from Denver, picked him up in Seattle. We drove all the way up to Fairbanks, Alaska, and rode Mark Air to Barrow, brought in my resume, hand-carried it to Cape Smythe Aviation. I wanted to fly not just any Alaska bush. I didn't want to fly the piston singles. I thought, life expectancy is not so good with that, but turbine equipment, and I've, turbine time, so maybe that'll make a difference. And I walked into the hangar, and I don't remember the gentleman's name, but he looked at me like I had worms coming out of my ears. Why would anyone want to come up here and do this? And it was the thing I just wanted to do the most. I'd rather do that than eat. But anyhow, on the way back home, I was at the Horizon Geo, drove by, and I thought, I've heard them on the radio when I'm flying air ambulance. I hear Horizon Air.
And Horizon was started in what, 85?
81.
81.
September 1st of 81.
September of 81, okay.
Yeah. Horizon Flight 100 from Seattle to Yakima.
That was the first one?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And 200 was Yakima back to Seattle.
Okay.
I thought, I'm going to go in, get an application, and right next door to the Geo, the building is still there. I don't know what's on the top floor, but there was a administrative services place, and I made copies of the application and hand wrote everything in, and they typed it in, and I went back to the Geo, and they said, well, we don't take that. You have to go to flight ops. It's down in Portland. Okay, so I drove to Portland, and I actually stopped at the Sheraton Hotel at the Portland airport, and I had brought my suit with me, interview suit, when I drove all the way up to Alaska and back. I went to the Sheraton, the men's room, put on my suit, carried my application into flight ops, turned in my resume, and then a month or two later, I got a call from Tom Gerharder, would like you to come up for the interview, and the rest is history.
Did you ever hear from that company in Barrow?
Nope.
Not a thing. You drove all the way up there.
And I went through,
there.
Sitka and Juneau and the Alaska Marine Ferry, coming back on the Marine Ferry. And I just went to every place, and it was a great father-son time. And I brought my backpack. I thought, I'm so close to the North Pole, kind of another passion is adventure and being outside. And I'm going to go hike a couple miles outside of town, set up my tent, and I'll camp out. And it was about 2 a.m. right next to the Chukchi Sea, and I realized there's polar bears up here, and I've got like a 3-inch, pocket knife.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh! And then I start hearing sounds, and there's about 4 guys on a quad, 4-wheeler quad, comes jumping over one of the gravel hillocks where the ice pushes the hill, the sand and surface up. They jump over it, and here's this tent right there, and they almost crashed into the tent. And I thought, well, I didn't get run over, but they also probably have scared away all the bears, so I'm okay.
It's a good thing. So you come into Horizon Airlines in
1989, February 5th of 89.
February 5th of 89. What did the airline look like at that time in 89? What was the fleet? What was the size? What was the feel of the airline? Milt was still involved, and the Milt Colt was still involved at that time running it, or was he already?
He was out. He sold in 86. He sold everything to Alaska. And I never did meet the man. I sure wish I would have. What a colorful character. But I think there was 3 F-28s, 10, 15 -8-100s, and I don't know, we had 15 or 20 Metros. And the basic in-dock instructor was one of our captains at the time, Roger Callahan, who was a larger-than-life guy, give you the shirt off his back, and he could just crack jokes, dad jokes, a mile a minute. But initially it was just kind of a wondering what's going on here.
Yeah.
The one fun thing, it looked like a big metal. Originally, I thought it was an empty metal fire extinguisher cylindrical thing about 3 feet tall, and it would hold the main door open to allow airflow to get through this place. And it turns out it was a JATO bottle that had been shot off from the Metro 2s for a single engine climb performance, swear engine that made the Metroliner. They thought, if you have an engine failure, kind of a V1 engine fail thing, part of your memory procedure is you pull this little handle between the seats and it fires off the JATO bottle. And so they had one of the last Metro 2s they were getting rid of, and the JATO bottle was end of life and it was expired. So they're going to have to take it out anyway.
Right.
They thought, well, let's test it. So they had it sitting out on the ramp, and the brakes off. Everyone's clear. The engines aren't running, but the batteries are on. And 3, 2, 1. I wasn't there for it, but I heard the stories. They pulled the handle, and all the smoke and flame and sound, and airplane didn't even roll.
Where was the bottle mounted on the airplane?
Right in the very tail cone, right at the base of the vertical stabilizer.
So you take off and you lose your engine, you pop the bottle, and that was how they were able to get this thing certified for single engine climb.
Yeah,
that's incredible, amazing. So what were those first few months like flying? Now you had already sold your part of the business to Monica. I mean, what was it like airline flying? Was it what you thought it was going to be?
Yeah, first airline gig, and having flown a number of charters, the Metro takes a while to get used to that airplane. So that's a big focus of your attention, and remembering you have to do the captain during the engine start is taking care of monitoring the engines. The first officer is making the safety briefing because there's no flight attendant, there's no bathroom, there's a curtain between you up front in the flight deck and the cabin, which we normally left open. It was quite a learning experience, and I think it was my second day of, in those days we called it IOE. We're flying into Pullman, and everything is a circling approach, VOR alpha approaches. And here we are at 400 feet, circling over the surrounding hillsides, and the check pilot is having me fly, and it's wintertime, and the windows kind of get fogged up on the inside of the Metroliners. And it was, okay, I know how to fly the airplane. I'm going to give everything I've got to just maintain my altitude and keep the turn going. And the captain is looking for the runway. And if I screw up, they're going to get distracted from what they're trying to do, look for the runway, and start monitoring my flight performance. So don't let them down.
Yeah. Boy, it's certainly changed a lot, hasn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, that's one of the big areas, and I know that you were part of that group that got into the RMP, and we can talk about that if you want to at some point there. But the flying back in those days was a lot more challenging, I feel like. Do you think that that's an accurate statement? I mean,
yeah, I think about that often now with auto throttles and the Magenta line and all those amazing things we have. And if you would have told me back then what we would have now, I'd think, well, you're talking about Buck Rogers, or you need to be drug tested or something, because that can't be possible.
Yeah, it's incredible.
I mean, vertically guided approaches to pretty much every runway end is that was stuff of dreams.
Yeah. How long was upgrade for you?
There was a chief pilot for the Metroliner, Tom Gerharder, and for the Dash 8 and the F-28 was Ted Blahnik. And so in the interview process, you meet with both of them, and there's someone from personnel that's also there. And they had said, expect probably 2 to 3 years to upgrade. So one day in our old original kind of World War II hand-me-down op center was a little fitness gym in there. So I'm in there working out one day, and it turns out it was around lunchtime, and Tom Gerharder, the then Metro chief pilot, was in there working out, and he says, hey, when are you going to upgrade? And I've been with the company 6 months. And I said, well, Tom, you said it was going to be 2 or 3 years. And he looked at me like, you've never been in the airline business before, have you? Well, no. Well, now we're growing so fast, we're going to have to hire street captains if we can't get those of you that have the qualifying flight time to upgrade. Kind of sounds like these days, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think 10 months with the company, I was got my type rating, and I was talking with Rick Smith, who was the examiner at the time, flying the airplane late one night in Eugene, where I got my type ride. And I said, hey, I'd be really interested in getting involved and doing other things. And, flight standards, being a check pilot would be great.
Yeah.
And he says, oh. So 12 months with the company, I was a check pilot. And it was just crazy times.
Yeah, wasn't it? So had you and Monica already gotten married by the time that you started as an airline pilot?
Yeah. So back to a comment you made about selling the business. And I said first to her, do you want to just buy the whole thing? And she said, no, I don't want to run this by myself. I'm not ready to do that. So we actually sold to an outfit, Executive Air, Critical Air, at the San Diego Montgomery Field. Once we sold it, we had to get together just to finish out the IRS tax books, stuff like that. And so now I can jump seat to Anchorage. She had taken a job as program director for Lifeguard Alaska at Providence Hospital in Anchorage, which I thought, wow, she's getting to fly in the state of Alaska, and I'm not. Dang. Anyhow, so I would jump seat up there, and we're going through all of our tax stuff, and we realized, we've seen each other at our absolute best and worst, and so this September will be our 35th anniversary.
Wow.
Yeah.
So you're at Horizon. You're a captain now on the Metro. Mm-hmm. Is that right? I want to sidebar because you also are a very renowned mountain climber. You've done what's called the 7 Summits. What are the 7 Summits? What is that whole concept in the mountain climbing world for the layman?
Yeah, so the 7 Summits, highest point, each of the 7 continents. And a friend of mine had given me a book titled The 7 Summits, written by Dick Bass and Frank Wells, which were 2 fairly unlikely mountaineers to do this, but they pulled off a lot of coordination and got some really smart, talented people to help them. And they were arguably the first to do it, but there was also a Canadian, Pat Morrow, and then the famous mountaineer Reinhold Messner was also doing this. So, here we are all of a sudden, kind of a race to complete all the 7 summits. And having always been interested in climbing, wow, that's a crazy dream to even think about, but I'm going to think about that. Monica and I, when we got married in September of '89, we thought about, we both really loved the mountaineering stories. Several months later, I was able to get, I think it was 3 weeks off of vacation, and we thought, well, let's go to Nepal.
Because you were a new hire pilot or a newish pilot at Horizon, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Because this would have been your first year at Horizon.
Yeah, so let's see, February of '89, so it was May of '90, we went to Nepal, and we hiked up to a place called Kalapatar, means dark rock. It's a little, about 1,500 feet above Everest Base Camp. And standing up there looking, and I thought, I gotta try this. And Monica was really good about that. She says, you gotta follow your dreams. And so I started, when we got back to back here, stateside to Washington State, Outside Magazine had a little advertisement for a company that was just getting started, Alpine Ascents International, and made a great relationship with the founding guy, Todd Burleson, who's where I did most of my climbing with. And coincidentally, also, one day I'm riding the jump seat on Alaska 727 from Portland to Seattle with the lady's name, Jeannie Fisher, and her husband was Scott Fisher, who was sadly, he perished in 1996. And so Scott and I met, talked on the phone, talking with Todd Burleson on the phone, who am I going to do this project with? And Todd was much more about, we're going to take it easy and we're going to have good food. And Scott was more, we're just going to take this thing and take no prisoners. And Monica wasn't quite so enamored with that. So made the choice to go with with Todd. So our first was Mount Vinson in Antarctica.
Where's the airport in Antarctica?
It's changed now, but in those earlier days, you would leave Punta Arenas in Chile, southern tip of Chile, and we flew in a DC-6, and we went to a place called Patriot Hills. Patriot Hills is very unique in that it's a freshwater lake, and of course it's Antarctica, so it's frozen rock hard, which is strategically very important because you can land a wheeled vehicle on it. You don't need something that converts from wheels to skis. Oh. So you don't land on snow. And so 1,800 miles to go down, and the crew, the first officer got out of his seat and let me fly a DC-6 for a few hours. That was pretty cool. But so you're about 550 miles from the South Pole, and then we would fly an outfit called Ken Boric Air, is a charter outfit out of Calgary. They would fly every year a Twin Otter down. It's about a little over 90 flight hours to get it from Calgary down there. And then they had a Cessna 180, which they basically just left down there. And in the wintertime, they would dig out a hole, take the wings off, and slide the 180 under the ice, put plywood sheets above it, basically make a sarcophagus for it, and then pull it out the next start of climbing season. But the cost of the fuel to carry all this in the DC-6 to get the fuel down there for Jet A for the Twin Otter and 100 low lead for the F-gas for the Cessna, they figured was about $90 US a gallon by the time you paid for all the transport and storage fees and stuff like that. So, so from Patriot Hills, about 120 miles or so to get to Vinson Base Camp, which is the traditional route. Maybe talk about that later, but my hero, my climbing mentor, was a classmate of my dad's, and he was the first guy to summit Mount Vinson with the National Science Foundation in 1966. And 24 years later, in 1990, I was the 100th to do it.
What order did you do those in, and what are they?
Yeah, so Mount Vinson in Antarctica, Aconcagua, looks like a funny spelled name, but Aconcagua in Argentina, South America, Kilimanjaro in Africa. Did that with my mom and dad and my wife, Monica, and then came home, washed my dirty skivvies, and went straight away to Nepal for Everest in 92, and then went back in 93, second time. And then right after Everest 93, washed my skivvies, went up to Denali in highest point in North America, Mount Elbrus, highest point in Europe, in Caucasus Range, and then to Carson's Pyramid, which is the highest point in Australasia, down in Papua New Guinea. And then the last one was Kosciuszko, which is the highest point in the mainland of Australia, which is a 7,300-foot ski hill. There's a chairlift goes almost to the top, and then there's a metal grate. You can wheel people in wheelchairs all the way to the summit.
And so what we're going to put in the description, there's a link to a video that covers all of those climbs into each detail, kind of how all that worked. Amazing pictures, amazing photos. I want to ask you a little bit, because in that documentary, you got to fly on a Concorde. What was that like, flying the Concorde? And can you share that story, what happened on that flight?
Yeah, it's one of the fun things about the 7 summits. I mean, it's about climbing and team building. You're trusting your lives literally with one another in some very uncomfortable places. There was always this aviation element to each of these things, and that's probably because pilot's life, that's kind of on our radar.
Yeah.
Airplanes are important things. And so my wife loves travel, and when she got out of medicine, she got into being a travel agent. And so when we were setting up this trip to go to Kilimanjaro, you're going to Nairobi, which from Portland, Oregon, pretty much is halfway around the world. And it turns out it was cheaper to go Portland, Nairobi, and keep going. So in British Airways terms, it's an RTW, around the world trip. And then British Airways came back and says, oh, you're doing an RTW for an extra $700 per person each. You can ride Concorde from JFK to Heathrow. So, well, okay, let's think about that. Yes. We flew in the night before to JFK and rode to taxi to JFK. And there's boardroom, Alaska has, and you have some of these places have a first class lounge. British Airways then also has Concorde lounge. So if you can take first class lounges and turn that up by a factor of 10, that was Concorde. I mean, when you walk in, there's bottles of Dom Perignon that are popped. I mean, these are $100 a bottle. These things are there's 10 of them in the middle of this little refreshment table. And of course, it's 8 a.m., so not now. And we're talking with this very proper British gentleman, the chief steward, and I showed him my badge and says, hey, I know those pilots got to be super busy and stressed right now. I don't want to bug them, but maybe at the end of the flight, do you mind if I could go up and say hi to him? And he says, well, if I may have your identification badge, sir. And we sit down in row 2A in Bravo, and I haven't even got my seatbelt on, and boom, there's champagne, caviar, all this stuff.
Yeah, living the good life.
And the chief steward comes back and says, excuse me, sir, the captain has invited you to the flight deck for takeoff. Will you follow me, please? And Monica's looking at me like, you lucky SOB. So I'm trying to, set all my stuff over on Monica's table. You can have all that. And the chief steward says, oh, you Yanks. And he picks up my champagne glass and everything, takes it up to the flight deck. And I'm thinking, we'd be splitting rocks in the state penitentiary if I did this on a U.S. flight. This is weird.
You have footage of like him waving. How did you get that footage of him waving?
Yeah, so we had our little Sony Hi8 video camera that we're going to use on the Kilimanjaro climb. And during my part of the flight, I mentioned that Monica, my wife, was also a private pilot. So they invited her to be up there in the jump seat for the landing. And so there's the video that you're talking about, Brendan, that's in our Seven Summits movie. And you see the flight engineer. That's he's saying to Monica, come on up.
Oh, I see. So you take off, the nose is bent down.
Mm-hmm.
All 4 burners go off when they advance the thrust. Could you feel? I mean, was it like a put you in the back of your seat, or was that like a normal takeoff?
No, it's. I mean, they've. I think the fuel load was 400,000 pounds of fuel, and we taxi out and we get onto the runway, and with all 4 engines running, they're apparently riding. It was very smooth. You couldn't tell, but the captain was very concerned about brake temperature before they started the takeoff roll. And when they went for takeoff, I've since listened to podcasts, Omega Tau, and some of those that have had British Airways pilots talk about these things. And I now have pieced together what was happening. But the captain will say, okay, gentlemen, on my mark, 3, 2, 1. And he takes all 4 thrust levers and he smacks them so you can hear them strike to the end of their travel in the console. What that was the flight engineer's signal. When he hears the thrust levers make that contact tap, he hits a stopwatch, and he has a certain amount of time for an engine health check to make sure all the engine pressure ratios, the EPRs and all these other parameters, he's looking to see them all get to the right place, and he says, good. And then they take this little gang bar behind the thrust levers, which would kind of be where we think of fuel cutoff switches, and those are the reheats. And then they turn those on. So the fuel flow with all the engines at full thrust is 20,000 pounds an hour per engine. And when the reheats go on, it doubled. It went to 40,000 pounds an hour per engine. 160,000 pounds an hour is going out the back. And this thing, I think V1 was 180 knots. I'm going from memory. And rotate was like 210 or 220, and V2 was 240 or something like that. And then at 400 feet, I think they turned off the reheats, and it felt like, oh my gosh, we've lost all power and we're just going to go into the ocean here. You felt like you were kind of just hanging there. And then it kind of settled down and everything was fine. And then we get the transonic clearance. There's a transoceanic and a transonic clearance I had to get from air traffic. And you could tell there's a lot of stress amongst the 3 pilots, the flight engineer and the captain first officer, until I got that. And then it was, okay. And then they turn on the inboard reheats first. You feel this thump and push against your back. And then the outboards come on, and the rate of climb goes to 6,000 feet a minute. And eventually you see the rate of climb indicator. It's a vertical tape. It just does this really odd from climb to descent, back to climb, and that's a shock wave moving across the fuel sludge across the static port.
Wow. When did they retract the nose?
The visor has 3 positions. One is fully up, so in cruise, and then there's a takeoff position, which is halfway extended, basically extended, and then there's landing, which is fully extended, just because of the angle of attack that delta wing has for the approach. So they can be able to see, if the visor is all the way up, they wouldn't be able to see the runway because of such high pitch attitudes.
Yeah.
And on takeoff, I want to say it was probably around 1,500 feet. They retracted it, and it gave a rumble. If you think about landing gear down on a airliner, if you took off and just left the gear down till 1,500 feet and then retracted, it was kind of that change in rumble.
Yeah. Of the 7 summits, what was the most technical mountain, and what one was, in your mind, the hardest mountain?
From a rock climbing technical phase was Karsten's Pyramid, but it was a limestone rock, and it's like the skin of a shark. In fact, when you climbed it, you were prepared to wear some heavy-duty clothing, because if you brush your skin, bare skin, against the rock, I mean, it's like a cheese grater. It's just going to take meat off. It's really fun climbing. It's not slippery rock, and it's a really strong, stable rock. It's not like you're thinking this is sketchy, this is going to come off and crash down. But there was a very, on a grading scale, 5.9, there's maybe a couple 5.11 moves in there, which, for Alex Honnold, that's no big deal. But,
right.
You're carrying your pack and all your gear, and it makes you think.
Yeah.
And then, of course, Everest was, just because of the altitude, is, as the saying goes in high altitude mountaineering, altitude is the ultimate equalizer. And just because you did on your previous trip at altitude doesn't mean you will this time, and vice versa. For me, I think 92 I was really trained and prepared and fit, and very stupid at what I did. And I'd never been on an 8,000 meter peak before, and I was treating it like a drag strip. How fast can I get up this thing? Not thinking that we're here for 6 to 8 weeks before we even go for the summit attempt. And here I am I'm racing with one of my Sherpa buddies, and we got up to Camp 3, 24,500 feet in record time, and went back down. Ended up, that's what set me off with pulmonary edema.
Was that hard for you to not summit Everest?
It was. I did go back up and went for the summit bid maybe 4 weeks after that. And everyone had said, well, once you've had PE, or they call it HAPE, high altitude pulmonary edema, once you've had HAPE, it's going to take a while till your lungs and aorta and all that stuff isn't going to be leaking fluid into your lungs again. But it's your life. And, I thought, well, I'll take it easy this time. I'll throttle way back and just try and be normal. And the morning of our summit attempt off of Camp 4 at the South Col, and I could feel it's like an old style coffee pot that percolates, and you can hear that bubble coming up from the boiling water. And if I hadn't had pulmonary edema before, I wouldn't have recognized that, and I would have probably gone for it, because it once you get the onset, it's about 24 hours later when you really get whacked. But I recognized that, and I promised my wife, I'm not going to do anything stupid.
Yeah,
I'm coming home. And so I pulled the plug. Yeah,
coming home is the most important thing, isn't it?
A climb isn't really a climb if it's not a round trip.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's kind of like a flight, takeoffs equal landings.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You've seen the evidence of people who've tried for the summit or who have that drive, right? Like, I got to make it. But sometimes not making it is also your own summit too, right?
Yeah. I just, live to climb another day.
Yeah.
There was a climbing team from India that we had met in base camp several months prior. Nice guys. And we were coming back up from the little hospital place called Ferrichade, about 14,000 feet, where I'd gotten the fluid out of my lungs and was back to climbing status. And on our way back up to base camp, we had learned over our little walkie-talkie radios that there had been a bad storm high up on the mountain, and 4 of the Indian climbers were going from Camp 3, 24.5, up to Camp 4, 26,000 feet, and they didn't make one made it, the other 3 did not make it, and the one guy was able to get back to Camp 3 and radio what had happened.
Yeah. And
then it's about 5 days later, moving from Camp 3 to 4, and literally I'm walking right next to one of those climbers. He's curled up, arms around his legs, and he's gazing up at the summit of Everest, and he's just hard as a rock.
Wow.
Yeah.
Unbelievable. You took a picture with the Horizon Airlines flag on every summit. And I just want to know why, because you were a fairly new pilot at Horizon when you first started, so you must have felt some connection to this little airline in the Northwest. And B, how did you logistically do all that schedules with the airline? Because you were a flying pilot too at the time, right?
Really good question. The company, the airline, was surprisingly supportive of this. And at the time, John Kelly was our president, and a gal named Nancy Pappas was kind of our manager of corporate communications. And it was just in a conversation with Nancy one day, and I'm thinking, the in-flight magazine, that'd be kind of interesting to tell stories of, Horizon supporting these kinds of things. And she came up with this Horizon flag and permission to take that up to the top and take pictures with it, which I did. And the company supported me with leaves of absence. They were just so supportive. And then it turns out, actually it was on the Everest 1993 trip, and we would listen every morning over breakfast. We'd listen to BBC shortwave. It was high frequency radio, and we'd get the news of what's going on around the world. And I heard on BBC that Alaska Air Group had announced plans to be launch customer for the Dornier 328 aircraft. I mean, pretty wild that happens on BBC News, and I'm hearing this halfway around the world, and base camp at 18,000 feet. So when I get back to the States, they're going to form an initial cadre to go through Dornier factory training and go through all the proving runs and build all the manuals and all that stuff. And all the performance engineering and things like that, I thought this is perfect. And so being part of that initial cadre and getting into arguably the one thing that the Metroliner had over the Wright Flyer was we had a technology called a DME hold switch. I mean, that's about as much technology as that airplane had. And then we're going to go into the Dornier, which is this first version of the Honeywell Primus 2000 system, this fully integrated EFIS thing. And so we're going from Fred Flintstone's car to something much more involved. And that was quite an interesting ride. And that was kind of, I'd been involved in other performance analysis things and kind of special projects and some accident investigation things that we had at Horizon. But this was my opportunity to really get into what I would consider to be more future aviation.
Yeah, and so that kind of sparks you down this path now into the technical pilot kind of stuff,
Mm-hmm.
right? So can you explain kind of what that role was and those first few things that you did? Because I know you paid tribute to Monica at some point during one of these projects.
Monica, business partner, but also, all these things take you away from home. And so she was keeping the home fires burning this whole time. Mm. And so, I'll never be able to say thanks enough for that. With the Dornier program, then led into the head-up guidance system. And George Bagley was a big part of that, kind of leveraging what was happening at Alaska Airlines with the 727 HGS program. And what really started that was in 1991. There was a lot of high-pressure weather systems moving through the Pacific Northwest. So we had a lot of dense fog. In those days, Cat 2 was 1,600 RVR, and the RVRs were below 1,600 for sometimes 10 days to 2 weeks at a time. So all the airplanes were maintenance pumpkins because all the maintenance bases for Alaska, Seattle, for Horizon, Portland, the airplanes couldn't get into maintenance. So it looked like 9/11 literally in those days. You had airplanes parked on taxiways in Yakima and Redmond and Walla Walla, and there's just, the dispatch would say, don't divert to Yakima. If you do, you'll block the runway. We'll shut the whole airport down. I remember having those phone conversations. And so Alaska started with the head-up guidance system, and then it was determined, well, wait a minute. If Alaska does this, but 60% of the ridership begins or ends on a Horizon flight, we're still going to not do well here. And at the time, they had 11 727s and 7 737-200s. So pretty small company compared to the behemoths of American, Delta, United. And they're trying to use technology to smartly and safely have a much better operating envelope and have improved their reliability, the ability to take off and land safely. Right. And so that's when the thing came up with the head-up guidance system in the Dornier, and they says, hey, can you do your engineering speak with all these engineers at Flight Dynamics and with the FAA? And it was interesting, on the first day with the Dash 100, these people are looking at us so politely, and one of them finally says, so you're not going to be able to do auto land unless you do huge changes. And we said, we know, but we're going to hand fly it. And these particular individuals didn't know about the HUD yet. And they looked at us like, you all need to be drug tested. And that began the first of it, which was our first revenue HGS Cat 3 approach was in June of 1995, 700 RVR. Bill Corbin was the captain, dear friend.
Yeah.
And he'd been a nuclear engineer on the submarines for the Navy.
Oh, really?
Apparently. Yeah.
I didn't know that.
But so all of that led to tech pilot stuff. And then when George Bagley went from VP of Flight Ops at Horizon, became Alaska's VP of Flight Ops. And while he was there at Alaska is when the R&P procedures were initially approved for Juneau, the Gastineau Channel. And when George came back to Horizon as president, he needed to decide about our fleet. And we had 12 Dorniers at the time. And he wasn't sure if that was going to be the right airplane for us or not. And he actually went out and flew with Don Weens and I. And he had put him in the left seat. And we were doing touch and goes in Redmond. And guy could fly an airplane. He hadn't touched an airplane in a long time. He'd been an F-28 captain years prior, but very, very gifted pilot. The decision was, this isn't going to work. We're going to do Dash 8 200s, and we're going to equip just like Alaska. We're going to have dual FMS, GPS. We're going to do R&P. And I remember I said to George, that's great. What's R&P? How do you spell it? And he says, well, that's going to be your job. You're going to go live with the tech pilots at the Alaska maintenance hangar and the engineering second floor and learn R&P and take it home.
I remember when I was in ground school, you came in and spoke to us, and you said something that has stuck with me my entire flying career. You said, if we bend metal, which is a pilot's way of saying if we have an accident, it's game over. Mm-hmm. What was your thought process in letting a group of new pilots know that?
2 points. That's great. No one's ever asked me this question back from those days way back when. You've got an awesome memory, Brendan. Holy cow.
Only on certain things. Only on certain things.
What was
anniversaries and where I have, like on a 4-day trip, by day 3, I have no idea where I was on day 1.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Yeah, so 2 things. One, the experience that I think we all saw in the industry, ValueJet, when they had the oxygen canisters that ignited, went into the Everglades, and it became that airline name became so maybe toxic is too strong of a word, but you weren't going to be able to sell tickets on that airline. They actually had to stop that name, and then it was after our time together in ground school, but Colgan was another name that just had to stop at some point. But the other part you talked about earlier of, for me as a new hire Metro pilot, what was it like being at an airline? And one of the things I think to make sure everyone gets the message, if they hear crash, game over, we're done. I mean, the liabilities, and you're looking at some of the other aviation accidents that have happened in the last few years. I mean, the aversion to risk, and rightfully so. I mean, we have a lot of operating procedures and standards and monitoring and safety management system that go into keeping us, making sure that we're not too far off the center line. And there's warning systems that present themselves to say, hey, you're getting too far off center line, you need to fix it. By saying that to new pilots, hopefully gets their attention, grabs them by the eyeballs and says, okay, that's it. That's the bottom line. Whatever we need to do, we're not going to crash an airplane.
Yeah. What are those things that you've learned that you would want other pilots to kind of know? What are those things that you would tell someone who's either A, just starting flying, or B, just got that upgrade? What are the things that you've learned that you would want those pilots to know?
Yeah, it's become when you get, what do they call it, the song is stuck in your head and you just can't get it out. It just keeps playing. Well, for me, since about age 55, I'm 63 now, this song was so quiet initially, and now it's like every day, all the time. And it's not a song really, it's more of a concept of mentorship and thinking, how do you how do you create and train leaders to do the right thing? And the mentors do that with the leaders, and the leaders then do that with the line crews. Through personal observation with crews that I consider to be really high performing and crews that aren't so much, what's the difference? Is the crews that are high performing are able to, all those things we just talked about with safety. You know, I love my wife, my kids. I am going to go home tonight. You know, maybe there's freezing rain and I have to stay at the hotel, but I'm going to be alive to talk about this. Is they take safety seriously. They make it fun to follow the rules. And I think the most inspiring leaders have a way to be SOP, standard operating procedures, and have fun doing it. And if they can demonstrate that to all of the flight attendants, the mechanics, the ramp agents, the new pilots, I think people tend to follow rules better when they enjoy them instead of, well, you know, this doesn't make sense. This is bullcrap kind of a thing. The other part of that is kind of the metaphor with climbing, with flying, is climbing when you rope up together. You're in your harness, and by contract, you have physically connected yourself with these other climbers, and you're going to live together or die together because you're roped up. So you're going into something that most of the time is very exhilarating. It's a blast, and once in a while is absolutely terrifying. And this might be your last breath, but you're going to do, you know, to your last breath, whatever you can to keep yourself and everyone on your rope team safe. So if you go to your next flight, ODARC 30 in the morning, and you meet up with the crew at the hotel van, or you're showing for your trip at your home airport, and I go into this thinking, their lives depend on me, and my life depends on them. And what am I going to do to demonstrate I can have fun doing this, and just be as standard as I can, and 99.99% of the time that works. And there's once in a while there's a personality, and this is where the real leadership and mentorship comes in. Is okay, well, that's great when all this works as intended, but sometimes it doesn't. That's life. That's reality. What do you do about that?
Yeah. What was that feeling when you had finished the last summit? I know that your parents were there, your daughters, your wife Monica. What was that? What was your emotion as you kind of took that last step?
I mean, if you see the video, there's two fun pictures at the very end, and they're taken in sequence of the actual event. But that'll sum up kind of how things were. But it was one, it's relief. You know, I've completed this as far as I'm going to complete it. I did go on in 10 years after the 93, my second Everest attempt. Cho'oyu is the sixth highest, about 27,000 feet, and it's right next door to Everest there. In 2003, was able to summit that, and so that was a great time. But I feel like it's given me a sense of who I am. I've been tested. I know pretty much how far I can go and pull it back and still live to come home. A lot of self-confidence, but also a lot of humility, because you can see within literally a heartbeat, someone is alive and then they're not. And, so you can't take things for granted. And, just thanks to my family for being supportive of all that time. That was a huge commitment on their part. They weren't, keeping their heart rate at 180 for 12 hours a day, but that was a lot of effort on their part to keep the home fires burning. And I think just through this company, they've rallied around the 7 summits and has managed to keep my job, and they supported that. And it's just a great affirmation to me that this is the right place to be.
Yeah. I know you had a lot of good mentors in your own journey, and I know a lot of the people that I went through training, a lot of the pilots who are now at other airlines or in the military, when they hear the name Perry Solmonson, they all get a big smile and they think, man, he was one of the greatest pilots I ever got to fly with. So I just want you to know that you leave a legacy with a lot of us, and there's a big part of you inside of all of us. And so on behalf of all those people, thank you for the time that you spent, for what you continue to do, for those pilots lucky enough to continue to work with you over there at Horizon Airlines. And any people or any person who wants to kind of follow a little bit more of the story, we'll put a link to your Seven Summits video down there in the description. So I encourage you to go check it out. It's an amazing story. But thank you, Perry. Appreciate for you taking the time.
Thank you so much, Brandon.
Take care. This has been fun.
Namaste.
Namaste.